Welcome to the lands of science fiction stories. I wish you a pleasant listening experience.
The ship groaned under the strain as Jack struggled to keep his eyes open. He'd been drifting through the endless void, his oxygen levels dipping dangerously low, while the dim glow of his console offered little comfort. Every button and dial stared back at him blankly, lifeless and cold, and with every tick of his dwindling reserves, hope seemed to slip further away. He exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of isolation pressing down on him like a tangible force. Then, a flicker on the radar. Just when he thought he'd slipped too far into the black to be noticed, a signal pulsed faintly, irregular, like the heartbeat of something long forgotten. He muttered to himself, voice cracking in the silence, a distress signal? Part of him didn't believe it. Out here, so close to the edge of known space, it was unlikely anyone would be sending out a cry for help. And if they were, the odds of it being friendly were slim. Yet there it was, blinking like a cosmic lighthouse on his screen. Every instinct screamed at him to turn away, to float in peace until the dark finally claimed him. But the signal continued, blinking insistently, daring him to take the chance. With a grim resolve, he entered the coordinates, muttering a quiet farewell to the silence he had grown accustomed to. If this was a trap, he figured it was a better end than suffocating alone. As he neared the source of the signal, the shape of a massive asteroid loomed into view, backlit by the dim red glow of a distant dying star. Shadows clung to its surface, jagged edges giving it the appearance of some ancient behemoth frozen in time. He adjusted the ship's course, inching closer, and noticed what looked like structures, crumbling remnants of some civilization, nearly invisible against the stone's dark expanse. Taking a breath, Jax initiated the landing sequence. His ship shuddered as it struggled against the asteroid's thin gravity. The engines whined, and for a moment, he thought it might all fall apart right there, scattering his remains across the desolate rock. But the ship held, groaning to a shaky stop on the barren surface. Silence settled over him, thicker now, pressing down with an almost oppressive weight. He grabbed his helmet and checked his sidearm, an odd sense of dread prickling at his skin. Jack stepped into the airlock, sealing his helmet with a click, and felt the pull of something deeper than mere curiosity. A strange, insistent tug that urged him forward. He couldn't explain it, but it drove him to press on, descending onto the cold, uneven surface of the asteroid. The starlight cast long, eerie shadows across the ruins, and as his boots met the ground, he noticed carvings etched into the stone, symbols that seemed to pulse faintly with an unnatural light. A shiver crawled up his spine, but he ignored it, scanning his surroundings. The structures sprawled out in every direction, remnants of some forgotten race lost to time. He moved cautiously, the only sounds his own footsteps crunching against the dust. Then he froze, his gaze locking onto a figure standing at the edge of the landing pad. She stood motionless, cloaked in shadows, her form almost merging with the darkness around her. As he squinted, trying to make out her features, an unsettling chill crept through him. She was tall, her posture impossibly still, and even from a distance, he could feel her eyes on him, intense and unyielding. "Are you the one who sent the signal?" he called out, his voice echoing in the empty silence. The figure stirred, stepping forward, and the faint starlight illuminated her face, a face that was both beautiful and haunting. Her skin was pale, almost luminous in the dark, and her eyes, they held a depth he couldn't fathom, dark and magnetic, pulling him in with a strange, unspoken force. Her lips curled into a faint, enigmatic smile as she regarded him, as if she'd been expecting him all along. "Yes," she replied, her voice soft and low, each word seeming to wrap around him like silk. "I called you here." Jack swallowed, feeling the weight of her gaze settle over him. There was something unsettling about her, something that sparked an instinct to reach for his weapon, though he resisted. "Why?" he managed to ask, his voice barely steady. "What is this place?" She tilted her head slightly, her smile deepening. "Lost souls find their way here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Or perhaps they are drawn here." The way she spoke, her words weaving through the silence, made him feel as if he were on the edge of something vast and dangerous. She took another step closer, her eyes never leaving his, and he felt his pulse quicken, a strange thrill mingling with the unease gnawing at him. "You're human," she observed, her tone laced with a peculiar curiosity. "Yes," he replied, feeling as though he were confessing something, though he couldn't explain why. "And you are?" She hesitated, then spoke a name that seemed to resonate in the empty air, as if it carried a weight beyond mere words. "Zeraphis." The sound of her name was both beautiful and strange, lingering in his mind like a whispered secret. He took a step back instinctively, but her gaze held him captive, a dark intensity simmering behind her calm demeanor. "What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice barely concealing the tension tightening his chest. Her smile faded, and for a moment, her expression was almost solemn. "Do you believe in curses?" she asked softly, her gaze unwavering. A frown crossed his face. "Curses? I don't have time for myths and fairy tales." "Don't you?" she replied, her tone almost playful. "Yet here you are, following a signal to a place beyond the edge of known space." She stepped closer, and he felt a coldness radiate from her, a chill that seeped through his skin, making his breath catch. "We are in the space between stars," she continued, her voice a soft murmur, "where myths hold more truth than you might imagine." Her words filled him with a strange unease, yet he couldn't deny the pull she had over him. It was as though her voice held a power that reached into him, stirring something deeper than logic or reason. He tried to ignore the faint tremor in his hands, forcing himself to speak. "If you're cursed, what does that have to do with me?" She held his gaze, studying him as though he were a puzzle she had yet to solve. "You came here not by chance," she said, her voice barely above a breath. "You came because I called you." Jax felt a shiver run through him. Her words carried a certainty that left him unable to argue, though he wanted to. There was a weight in her gaze, a hunger simmering beneath her calm exterior that made him feel as though he were already bound to her fate. "If you need help, I'll hear you out," he said, his voice wavering. "But I don't intend to get trapped here." At that, her smile returned, a faint glimmer of amusement in her eyes. "Trapped?" she echoed, her voice soft and almost mocking. "I'm afraid you won't be leaving any time soon, Jax." He stiffened, the sound of his name sending a chill down his spine. "How do you know my name?" She took another step closer, her presence enveloping him, and he felt the world shift around him, as though her very existence bent the space they occupied. "I know many things about you," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. "You were drawn to this place because you belong here, just as I do. And you will not leave until you fulfill what you were meant to." Jax's hand tightened around his sidearm, but he couldn't bring himself to raise it. Her gaze held him, unbreakable, her eyes dark and endless, and he felt as though he were falling, drawn into the depths of something far older and darker than himself. He wanted to turn away to escape her pull, but something in him had already surrendered, captivated by the promise of secrets that lay beyond his understanding. "What is it you want from me?" he whispered, his voice barely steady. She moved closer, her face mere inches from his, and he could feel her cold breath against his skin. "Help me break these chains," she murmured, her eyes gleaming with an unnatural light. "And in return, I will show you things beyond the stars, secrets that no human has ever known." Her words wrapped around him like a spell, and though every instinct screamed at him to run, he found himself unable to resist. He nodded slowly, feeling the weight of his choice settle over him, and as she smiled, a dark, triumphant smile, he knew that he had already stepped too far to turn back. The silence around them thickened, pressing down like the weight of 1,000 forgotten souls, and as he stood there, bound by the promise of the unknown, he felt himself pulled deeper into her world, a world where shadows and light twisted into something altogether darker, and far more dangerous. Jax followed Seraphis into the shadows, her figure moving with an unnatural grace as she glided across the cracked stone floor of the ancient ruins. The dim crimson light from the distant star cast long, eerie shadows that seemed to shift with every step, as though alive, watching him waiting. The structures surrounding them rose high, their edges jagged and worn, remnants of a forgotten civilization that had crumbled into silence. The air was cold, biting through his suit, and he shivered, glancing around at the strange carvings etched into the walls. Symbols, intricate and alien, glowed faintly, illuminating their path in a soft, eerie light. He could feel something in the air, a tension, an energy that seemed to hum just below the surface. It was as though the ruins themselves were alive, thrumming with a forgotten power. Seraphis moved ahead, her silhouette sharp and elegant against the decaying stone, her dark cloak trailing behind her like a shadow. She didn't turn to look back, but her voice cut through the silence, soft and magnetic. "These symbols," she murmured, her fingers tracing one of the ancient carvings, "are fragments of the curse that binds this place, and me to it." Jax watched her fingers glide over the symbols, a strange, almost reverent expression on her face. "And you expect me to break them?" he asked, his voice barely hiding the skepticism that laced his tone. He wanted to believe her, something about her drew him in, compelled him to listen, but a part of him held back, wary of the dark energy that seemed to radiate from her. Yes, she replied, turning to face him, her eyes holding an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. Your life force is different. Pure. It has the strength to weaken these symbols, enough for me to escape. Jax frowned, his gaze flickering to the symbols again. So, I'm just supposed to put my hand on them and, drain myself? Not entirely, she said, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. It will take only what is necessary. Nothing more. He hesitated, glancing back at her, searching her face for any hint of deception. But her expression remained calm, serene, her dark eyes reflecting the faint glow of the symbols around them. She extended her hand, gesturing toward a large stone slab etched with an especially intricate design, and nodded for him to approach. Place your hand here, she instructed, her voice soft but firm. Jax clenched his jaw, glancing between her and the symbol. He knew this was a risk, that whatever bound her here might be beyond his understanding. Yet something deeper compelled him to obey, a pull he couldn't quite explain, as though the decision had been made long before he arrived. Slowly, he reached out, his fingers brushing against the cold, rough surface of the stone. The moment his skin touched the symbol, a searing cold shot through his hand, racing up his arm and into his chest. He gasped, his breath hitching as the chill dug deep, slicing into his very core. It was a cold that went beyond the physical, a cold that seemed to seep into his soul, pulling something essential from him. He tried to pull his hand back, but it was as though the symbol held him in place, its dark energy wrapping around his wrist like invisible chains. Stay, Seraphis murmured, her voice soft but commanding. It will pass. Jax gritted his teeth, fighting against the urge to scream as the cold intensified, tearing through him like shards of ice. His vision blurred, and he felt as though he were slipping away, his consciousness fading, lost in a sea of darkness. But then, as suddenly as it had begun, the pain ebbed, leaving behind an eerie numbness that settled over him like a blanket. He pulled his hand away, staring down at his palm, which now felt strangely hollow, as though a part of him had been siphoned away. He looked up at Seraphis, his voice barely a whisper. What did it take? She met his gaze, her expression softening, and for a moment, he thought he saw a flicker of sorrow in her eyes. Your vitality, she replied, her tone gentle. The seal consumes a part of your essence, binding it to the curse. But in doing so, it weakens the hold this place has over me. Jack staggered back, his breathing shallow as he processed her words. His essence. A piece of himself was now woven into this dark, ancient place, feeding something he barely understood. But before he could fully grasp the implications, Seraphis stepped closer, her cold hand resting on his arm, steadying him. You did well, she murmured, her voice a soothing balm against the fear gnawing at his mind. But the journey has only just begun. He looked up at her, searching her face for answers, but her expression remained calm, almost detached, as though the sacrifice he just made were a mere necessity, a means to an end. Yet in her eyes, he saw a glint of something more, a hunger that went beyond the curse, beyond her need for freedom. It was a hunger that unnerved him, and yet, he felt an inexplicable pull toward her, a need to see this through, even if it meant giving more of himself. As they continued deeper into the ruins, the darkness around them grew thicker, the air colder. The carvings on the walls seemed to pulse with a life of their own, and every step echoed through the silent corridors, amplifying the feeling that they were being watched. Jax could feel his heart pounding, his senses heightened, alert to every shadow, every sound. They reached a narrow passage, the walls lined with more of the glowing symbols, and Seraphis paused, her gaze distant as she studied the markings. These symbols, she said almost to herself, they were carved by my people long ago. They are the terms of my exile, a binding that has kept me here for centuries. Jax frowned, glancing around at the intricate carvings that covered every inch of the walls. Your exile? He asked, curiosity outweighing his caution. What did you do to deserve that? She turned to him, her eyes darkening, and he felt a shiver crawl up his spine. I defied a sacred law, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. They deemed me a danger, a threat to our way of life. And so they cast me here, bound by symbols that ensure I can never return. For a moment, he thought he saw a flicker of pain in her eyes, a vulnerability that seemed at odds with her otherwise stoic demeanor. But as quickly as it appeared, it was gone, replaced by the calm, unyielding expression she wore like a mask. And now you need my help to break them, he said, piecing together the fragments of her story. "Yes," she replied, her voice soft but resolute. "The symbols are attuned to life force, to energy. I can no longer generate it myself, but with yours we can weaken them, one by one, until the curse is lifted." Jax nodded slowly, the weight of her words pressing down on him like a tangible force. He knew that every symbol he weakened would take more of him, that each step would bind him closer to her fate. And yet, despite the danger, he felt a strange compulsion to continue, as though some part of him were already entwined with hers. They reached a large chamber, the walls lined with towering pillars, each one etched with more of the ancient symbols. In the center of the room lay another seal, its intricate design glowing faintly in the dim light. Seraphis turned to him, her expression unreadable. "This is the second seal," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It will demand more of you, but once it is broken, my strength will grow, and we will be one step closer to freedom." Jax clenched his jaw, steeling himself against the fear that churned in his stomach. He knew that each seal would take a part of him, that he would emerge from this changed, perhaps irrevocably. But as he looked into Seraphis's eyes, he felt an unshakable resolve settle over him, a need to see this through, to uncover the secrets she held. Without hesitation, he placed his hand on the symbol, bracing himself for the wave of cold that he knew was coming. But this time, the pain was sharper, deeper, tearing through him like a blade made of ice. He gritted his teeth, his vision blurring as the symbol drew from him, draining him until he was barely able to stand. As the pain ebbed, he staggered back, gasping for breath, and Seraphis caught him, her touch firm and cold. She looked at him with something that almost resembled admiration, and he could see the faint glow of power returning to her, her figure seeming to grow sharper, more defined. "You're stronger than I expected," she murmured, her voice laced with something that sent a thrill through him, a mixture of gratitude and something darker. He looked up at her, his mind foggy with exhaustion, and managed a weak smile. "Then let's keep going." A faint smile curved her lips, and she nodded, leading him deeper into the shadows, the promise of freedom hanging heavy between them. "Absolutely." Here's an expanded version of Chapter 3, in which Jax's journey with Seraphis intensifies. The sense of sacrifice and the dark tension between them grow as they prepare to confront the cost of breaking the curse. The path grew darker and narrower, the ancient stone walls pressing in around them as Jax and Seraphis ventured deeper into the ruins. Shadows clung to every corner, stretching out like tendrils, shifting and curling as though alive. The air was thick, suffused with a cold that seemed to seep into his bones, an unnatural chill that grew stronger the closer they got to the heart of the curse. Seraphis walked ahead of him, her figure cloaked in darkness, yet more vibrant than before. Her movements had taken on a fluid, almost ethereal grace, her every step carrying a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. With each seal he broke, he could feel her growing stronger, as if a veil was lifting, allowing her true nature to emerge. "Tell me something," Jax called out, his voice echoing through the empty corridor. "This curse, why did it demand so much from you?" Seraphis glanced back, her dark eyes flickering with a faint, distant sadness. "Because I defied a law that my people held sacred. In their eyes, I became a danger. Something that had to be contained." Her voice was calm, but he could sense the bitterness lying just beneath the surface. "To them, I was no longer one of their own but a threat, a symbol of everything they feared." Jax furrowed his brow, trying to piece together her story. "What kind of law could lead to something like this?" he asked, gesturing to the crumbling walls around them, to the symbols etched into every surface, binding her to this ancient prison. A shadow flickered across her face, and for a moment, he thought she might tell him. But instead, she shook her head, her expression unreadable. "It is a long and painful story, one I hope you'll never have to understand. Suffice it to say, I broke a rule I should not have broken, and my people saw fit to punish me with an eternity of silence." Jax felt a pang of sympathy for her, despite the danger that seemed to hang over every word. He could see the toll her imprisonment had taken, the weariness etched into her gaze, the faint tremor in her voice as she spoke of her exile. Yet there was a strength in her, a quiet, unyielding resolve that drew him in, binding him to her fate. They entered another chamber, the walls lined with more of the glowing symbols, each one pulsing faintly as though alive. In the center of the room lay the second seal, its intricate design shimmering in the dim light, casting strange shadows across the floor. Seraphis turned to him, her gaze intense, and he felt his pulse quicken, an unspoken tension crackling between them. "This is the second seal," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. It will demand more from you, Jax. A deeper sacrifice than the first. Jax clenched his jaw, his gaze flickering to the seal. He knew what it would mean to place his hand upon it, to allow the curse to draw from him once more. He could feel the exhaustion settling into his bones, the hollow ache left behind by the first seal. And yet, despite the fear gnawing at him, he felt a strange compulsion to continue, to give himself over to the darkness, to unravel the mysteries that lay within her. "Let's get this over with," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. He reached out, his hand hovering over the symbol, his skin tingling as he felt the cold radiating from it. He took a deep breath, bracing himself, and pressed his palm to the stone. Instantly, a wave of searing pain shot through him, sharper and colder than before, tearing through his body like shards of ice. He clenched his teeth, his vision blurring as the seal pulled at his very essence, draining him, siphoning away the last of his strength. "Stay with me, Jax," Seraphis murmured, her voice soft, steadying, grounding him in the midst of the pain. He could feel her presence beside him, her cold hand resting on his shoulder, her gaze unwavering as she watched him endure the torment. The pain intensified, a relentless, unyielding cold that seemed to sink into his bones, wrapping around his heart, his mind, pulling him deeper into the darkness. His knees buckled, and he sank to the floor, gasping for breath as the curse tightened its hold on him, drawing from him until he felt hollow, empty. But then, as suddenly as it had begun, the pain faded, leaving behind a strange numbness, an absence that seemed to echo through his body. He felt weightless, as though a part of him had been stripped away, leaving only a shell in its place. He looked up, dazed, and met Seraphis's gaze, her eyes gleaming with a dark, almost feral light. "You did well, Jax," she murmured, her voice laced with something that sent a thrill through him, a mixture of admiration and something darker. She knelt beside him, her hand resting on his cheek, her touch cold but strangely comforting. He could see the faint glow of power returning to her, her figure more vivid, more alive than before. Jax managed a weak smile, the numbness still settling over him like a blanket. "Glad I could help," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Seraphis's lips curved into a faint smile, but there was something predatory in her gaze, a hunger that went beyond gratitude. "Each seal we break brings me closer to freedom," she said softly, her hand lingering on his cheek, her touch sending a shiver through him. "But it also brings you closer to something else." He frowned, trying to ignore the strange pull of her words. "What do you mean?" She tilted her head, her dark eyes studying him, her gaze piercing as though she could see the very fabric of his soul. "The curse demands a price, Jax. With each seal, it takes a part of you, a part that you may never get back." Her fingers trailed down his jawline, her touch lingering, cold but somehow electrifying. "But the further we go, the deeper your connection to me becomes." Jax swallowed, his heart pounding as her words settled over him. He could feel it, the bond that was forming between them, an unbreakable thread that seemed to tighten with every step they took. And though it terrified him, a part of him found it intoxicating. "What happens when we break the final seal?" he asked, his voice barely steady. Seraphis's smile faded, a shadow flickering across her face. "When the final seal is broken, I will be free," she said, her voice laced with a faint sorrow. "But you may not be the same." Jax's hand tightened around the cold stone beneath him, a knot of fear twisting in his stomach. He had known this would demand a sacrifice, that freeing her would come at a cost. But the way she looked at him, the way her gaze lingered on him with something that bordered on possession, made him wonder if the price would be far greater than he had imagined. He nodded, stepping forward, and prepared to face whatever lay ahead. Seraphis rose, her hand lingering on his shoulder, her gaze softening as she looked down at him. "I cannot ask this of you, Jax. If you choose to stop, I will understand." He looked up at her, meeting her gaze, and felt the words catch in his throat. He knew he should walk away, that he should leave this place before it claimed him. But as he looked into her eyes, he felt an unshakable pull, a need to see this through, to stand beside her until the end, no matter the cost. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, his voice resolute. She smiled, a soft, haunting smile that sent a thrill through him, and extended her hand. He took it, feeling her cold fingers wrap around his, and together they rose, stepping deeper into the shadows, the weight of the curse pressing down upon them like a heavy shroud. As they ventured further into the ruins, the air grew colder, the darkness thicker, and Jax could feel the presence of something ancient and malevolent lurking just beyond the edge of his vision. The walls around them seemed to breathe, the symbols pulsing with a dark, otherworldly light, casting strange shadows that twisted and writhed in the corners of his eyes. And through it all, he could feel the bond between them growing stronger, tightening with every step, every breath, binding him to her in ways he couldn't understand. It was as though the very essence of the curse was wrapping around them, merging their fates, entwining their souls in a dark, inescapable embrace. Finally, they reached another chamber, larger and darker than the others, the walls covered in symbols that glowed with a faint, malevolent light. In the center of the room lay the third seal, its design more intricate, more foreboding than the others, as though it held a deeper, more dangerous power. Seraphis turned to him, her gaze intense, and he could see the faint tremor in her hands, the dark anticipation simmering in her eyes. "This is the final seal, Jax," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Once this is broken, I will be free." Jax looked at the seal, his heart pounding, and felt a surge of fear grip him. He knew this would demand the greatest sacrifice yet, that breaking this seal would bind him to her in ways he couldn't fully comprehend. But as he looked into her eyes, he felt an unshakable resolve settle over him. The chamber loomed before them, an expanse of darkness pierced only by the eerie glow of the final seal. Its intricate design pulsed with a malevolent energy, the symbols intertwining like serpents dancing in a sinister ritual. Jax felt his heart race, each beat echoing through the silent hall like a drum of war. This was it, the culmination of his journey, the point of no return. Seraphis stood beside him, her presence both commanding and hauntingly beautiful. The shadows seemed to bow to her will, swirling around her form as if drawn to her very essence. Her eyes, dark and fathomless, met his with an intensity that sent shivers down his spine. There was a hunger there, a desperate need that transcended mere freedom. "You know what must be done," she whispered, her voice a melodic blend of sorrow and determination. "This is the final seal. Breaking it will free me from the curse, but it will cost you dearly." Jax swallowed hard, the weight of her words pressing down on him. He glanced at the seal again, its symbols mocking him with their complexity. He reached out, his hand trembling, and placed his palm against the cold stone. Instantly, a surge of energy coursed through him, searing pain ripping through his veins like molten fire. He gasped, clutching his hand as darkness threatened to consume him. "No," he murmured, pulling his hand away, his vision blurring. "There has to be another way." Seraphis stepped closer, her touch both soothing and electrifying. Her fingers brushed his cheek, and he felt an inexplicable warmth seep into his being, counteracting the coldness of the seal. "There is no other way," she replied softly. "The curse binds us both. Only through sacrifice can we be free." He looked into her eyes, seeing the depth of her torment and the undeniable connection they shared. It was as if their souls were intertwined, bound by forces neither fully understood. The air between them thickened, charged with an unspoken desire that both terrified and enticed him. "Why won't you let me go?" Jax demanded, his voice cracking under the weight of his emotions. "What do you really want?" Seraphis's gaze softened, a flicker of vulnerability breaking through her composed facade. "I don't want to let you go because you've become a part of me," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your sacrifice isn't just about breaking the curse, it's about binding our fates together. I can't bear the thought of losing you." Jax's breath hitched, his mind racing to process her revelation. The lines between fear and longing blurred, and he felt himself teetering on the edge of an abyss he wasn't sure he wanted to fall into. "I came here to survive," he said quietly, his resolve wavering. "I didn't ask for this." "But fate has a way of guiding us," Seraphis replied, her fingers tracing the contours of his face. "You were drawn here for a reason, Jax. Together, we can uncover truths that lie beyond the stars, secrets that have been lost to time." He struggled to maintain his composure, the pain from the seal still lingering in his hand like a phantom limb. "At what cost?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Seraphis stepped even closer, her presence enveloping him, making it hard to breathe. "At the cost of a part of you," she whispered, her eyes glistening with an intensity that bordered on desperation. "But it's a small price to pay for the freedom we seek." Jax felt the pull of her words, the seductive allure of the unknown tempting him to surrender to the darkness. He looked down at his hand, feeling the emptiness where the seal had drained his essence. It was a hollow victory, a reminder of what he was willing to sacrifice. "No," he said firmly, shaking his head despite the exhaustion weighing him down. "I won't let you sacrifice me." Seraphis's expression hardened, the vulnerability fading as determination took its place. "You don't have a choice," she declared, her voice now edged with authority. The curse binds us. It won't let you leave until the final seal is broken. Jax's mind raced, searching for any possible loophole, any chance to escape this fate. But deep down, he knew she was right. The darkness that enveloped the chamber seemed to whisper his doom, its tendrils reaching into his very soul. I won't be a part of this, he said, stepping back, trying to distance himself from her intense gaze. I came here to survive, not to become part of some ancient curse. Seraphis reached out, her fingers entwining with his, pulling him close. You already are, she murmured, her breath warm against his skin. Your essence flows into the seal, binding you to me. It's already done. Jax felt a chill run down his spine, the reality of his situation settling in like a suffocating blanket. He looked into her eyes, seeing not just an alien woman but something more, a predator lurking beneath the surface, her desire to keep him tethered to her overriding any semblance of compassion. What have you done to me? He demanded, trying to muster strength he no longer felt. Seraphis smiled, a dark, alluring smile that sent a shiver through him. I've made you mine, she declared, her voice dripping with a promise of both pleasure and peril. Together, we can explore the depths of the universe, uncover secrets that no one else can. But you must fully commit. Jax's resolve began to crumble under the weight of her words and the undeniable chemistry that simmered between them. The pain from the seal seemed to ebb, replaced by a strange, intoxicating numbness that clouded his judgment. I don't want this, he whispered, his voice barely audible. But you already are, Seraphis insisted, her fingers tightening their hold on his. Accept it, and embrace the power that comes with it. Reject it, and remain trapped in this darkness forever. Jax closed his eyes, battling the conflicting emotions raging within him. The fear of losing himself clashed with the allure of the unknown, the promise of liberation intertwined with the dread of eternal bondage. He could feel Seraphis's heartbeat against his chest, a rhythm that mirrored his own, creating a bond that was both physical and metaphysical. I need time to think, he said finally, breaking free from her grip and stepping back. I need to understand what this means. Seraphis's expression shifted, her eyes flashing with a mix of anger and longing. There is no time, she snapped, her voice rising. The curse is relentless. The longer we delay, the stronger it becomes. Jax felt a surge of desperation. I didn't ask for any of this. I came here alone. Countered, her voice softening slightly. You were chosen for a reason, Jax. Together, we can change everything. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. I can't let you do this to me. I won't become a part of your curse. Seraphis's eyes bore into his, a storm of emotion swirling within them. If you won't help me, then you will remain here forever, bound to this place and to me, she threatened, her voice cold and unyielding. I won't let you go. Jax's heart pounded in his chest, his mind racing for a way out. But the darkness seemed to close in around him, the symbols on the seal pulsating with a life of their own, tightening their grip on his soul. He realized that resistance was futile, the curse had already ensnared him, and there was no escaping its reach. I don't want this, he repeated, his voice breaking as tears welled in his eyes. Please let me go. Seraphis's facade faltered for a moment, revealing a glimpse of the woman she once was, proud, fierce, and burdened by centuries of solitude. I never wanted to hurt you, she confessed, her voice tinged with sorrow. But the curse demands a bond. It won't release you until you've fully embraced it. Jax fell to his knees, the weight of his predicament pressing down on him like a physical force. He felt his strength waning, the seal's influence draining him further. But amidst the despair, a flicker of defiance ignited within him. He couldn't give in to the darkness, couldn't allow himself to be consumed by the very curse he sought to break. Summoning every ounce of willpower, he looked up at Seraphis, meeting her gaze with unwavering determination. I won't let this define me, he declared, his voice strong despite the pain. I came here to survive, and I will find a way out on my own terms. Seraphis's eyes widened in surprise, the defiance in his voice sparking something within her. For a brief moment, their eyes locked, a silent battle raging between them. The air crackled with tension, the very fabric of the ruins seeming to tremble under the weight of their confrontation. You think you can defy the curse? She challenged, her voice edged with disbelief. It's ancient, unyielding. It won't let you escape its grasp. But I can fight it, Jax insisted, pushing himself to his feet despite the exhaustion threatening to pull him under. There has to be another way. I won't give up. Seraphis took a step back, her expression conflicted. If you choose this path, you'll face unimaginable consequences, she warned, her voice a haunting melody of warning and longing. But if you don't, you'll remain trapped here, bound to this place and to me forever. Jax felt a surge of determination. I'd rather face those consequences than be enslaved by this curse. There has to be another way. A heavy silence settled between them, the only sound the distant hum of the sealed chamber. Seraphis looked away, her shoulders slumping slightly as she grappled with his defiance. You're stronger than I gave you credit for, she admitted quietly. Perhaps there is another way. Jax approached her cautiously, extending a hand in a gesture of peace. Let's find it together. Maybe we can find a way to break the curse without sacrificing ourselves. Seraphis hesitated, her dark eyes searching his for any sign of deceit. Slowly, she reached out, her fingers intertwining with his, a tentative alliance forming between them. Very well, she agreed, her voice softening. But know this, time is against us. The curse grows stronger with each passing moment. Together, they turned their attention back to the final seal, the symbols pulsing with an ominous light. What needs to be done? Jax asked, determination etched into every line of his face. Seraphis studied the symbols, her fingers tracing the intricate patterns as she sought a solution beyond the sacrifices they had already made. There is an ancient counterspell, she explained, her voice steady despite the urgency of their situation. It requires a convergence of our energies, a harmonious balance that can neutralize the curse without draining our life forces. Jax nodded, understanding the gravity of their task. How do we achieve this balance? She glanced at him, her eyes reflecting a newfound hope. We must synchronize our heartbeats, our energies must align perfectly. It's a delicate process, one that requires complete trust and unity. Jax took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. I'm ready, he declared, meeting her gaze with unwavering resolve. Let's do this together. Seraphis smiled, a genuine warmth replacing the darkness that had once enveloped her. Then let us begin. They stood side by side, their hands still entwined, as they focused their energies on the final seal. The symbols responded to their synchronization, the pulsating light intensifying as their hearts beat in unison. A surge of power flowed between them, a harmonious energy that resonated through the chamber, counteracting the malevolent force of the curse. The air crackled with electricity, and the ground beneath them seemed to hum with life. Seraphis's presence grew brighter, her form radiating with an ethereal light that dispelled the shadows surrounding them. Jax felt a surge of strength, his exhaustion momentarily forgotten as the counterspell took hold. But as the energy reached its peak, a sudden darkness erupted from the seal, a swirling vortex of shadows that threatened to engulf them both. Jax struggled to maintain his focus, the darkness clawing at his mind, trying to pull him into its abyss. Seraphis held his hand tighter, her eyes locking onto his with an unyielding determination. We can do this, she urged, her voice a beacon of hope amidst the chaos. Stay with me, Jax. Drawing upon every ounce of willpower, Jax pushed back against the darkness, their synchronized energies forming a barrier that repelled the malevolent force. The symbols on the seal glowed brighter, their light piercing through the shadows, neutralizing the curse's hold. With a final triumphant surge, the darkness dissipated, leaving behind a chamber filled with a serene, radiant light. The final seal cracked, fragments of ancient stone floating away like embers in the night. Seraphis stood before him, her form transformed. No longer bound by shadows, she radiated a celestial beauty that was both captivating and awe-inspiring. It's done, she breathed, her voice filled with a mixture of relief and gratitude. The curse is broken. Jax collapsed to his knees, exhaustion overwhelming him, but a sense of accomplishment washing over him. We did it, he whispered, looking up at her with a weary smile. Seraphis approached, her hand reaching out to help him up. Yes, we did. Together. As he stood, Jax felt a profound change within him. The sacrifices he had made had not only freed Seraphis, but had also forged an unbreakable bond between them. He looked into her eyes, seeing not just a vampire alien woman, but a partner who had stood by him through unimaginable trials. What's next? He asked, his voice filled with curiosity and a newfound sense of purpose. Seraphis smiled, her eyes sparkling with the light of 1,000 stars. Now, we explore the universe together. There are so many secrets to uncover, so many worlds to discover. Our journey has only just begun. Jax felt a surge of excitement mixed with a touch of trepidation. Where do we start? She took his hand, leading him toward the exit of the chamber. Anywhere the stars take us. As they walked side by side, the ancient ruins fading behind them, Jax couldn't help but marvel at the path that had brought him here. From a lone survivor drifting through the void to a man bound by fate and love, his life had changed in ways he could never have imagined. But amidst the uncertainty of the future, one thing was clear: together, they could face whatever challenges the cosmos had in store for them. And as they ventured into the vastness of space, their hearts beat in perfect harmony, a testament to the sacrifices they had made and the unbreakable bond they had forged. But fate had other plans. The air was thick with the weight of their triumph, but Jax could feel the lingering tension in the silence. The final seal had broken, and the curse that had bound Seraphis for centuries was now shattered. She stood before him, her form glowing with an ethereal light that cast shadows across the ancient ruins. The darkness had lifted from her, but Jax felt no relief from the weight in his chest. What they had done, what they had endured, had irrevocably changed both of them. Seraphis turned to face him, her eyes shining with an intensity that made his heart beat faster. The transformation in her was undeniable. The coldness that had once clung to her was now replaced by an inner warmth that radiated from her being, as if she had finally shed the chains of her past. "You've done it," she whispered, her voice soft, yet carrying the weight of centuries. "You freed me. And in doing so, you freed yourself from the curse." Jax swallowed hard, his throat dry as he searched her face for something familiar. He had come to this place, at first, thinking he was simply a pawn in a cosmic game, a survivor struggling to find his way. But now, standing before her, he realized that his journey had led him to something much greater, a bond forged not just in sacrifice, but in a love he had never expected. "You say I'm free," Jax murmured, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "But I feel like I'm still caught in something. Something between us. This bond we share, it's deeper than I thought." Seraphis stepped closer, her hand reaching out to gently touch his arm. "It's because you've given more than just your life force," she said, her voice steady and calm. "You gave a part of your soul. And that part will always be mine, just as mine will always be yours." The gravity of her words sank deep within him, a strange warmth blooming in his chest. "Is that what you wanted?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "For me to become part of you?" Seraphis tilted her head slightly, studying him with an expression that mixed both sadness and understanding. "I never wanted to trap you, Jax," she confessed. "I wanted to be free, free from the curse, from the loneliness of centuries, and from the memory of what I lost. But in the end, the bond we formed is not just about breaking chains. It's about finding something greater than ourselves." Jax could feel her words wrapping around him, filling the empty space between them. He had come here thinking that the price of freedom would be his life, but what he had found was something far more complex, a connection that transcended the boundaries of life and death. The curse had taken much from both of them, but in its place, something new had bloomed. "Are we still who we were?" he asked softly. "After everything we've given? Everything we've lost?" Seraphis smiled faintly, her hand gently cupping his cheek. "We are who we choose to be," she said, her voice filled with an odd mixture of hope and melancholy. "The past can't be undone. The price we paid can't be erased. But we still have a choice. A chance to move forward." Jax closed his eyes, feeling the weight of her words settle in his heart. He had lost pieces of himself along the way, pieces of his soul, his humanity. But in their place, he had gained something far greater, an eternal bond with someone who had transcended her own darkness. He could feel the power of their connection coursing through him, a constant pull that would never let go. He had been changed, but in ways he couldn't yet fully understand. "Where do we go now?" he asked, his voice steady, though uncertainty still lingered in the air. Seraphis's gaze softened, and for the first time since they had met, she seemed truly at peace. "We go wherever the stars take us," she replied, her smile radiant and full of promise. "Together, we can chart a new course. The universe is vast, and there are many worlds left to explore." Jax nodded, the future ahead of them unfurling like an open road. There would be challenges, no doubt. But for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel alone. He had been part of a curse, part of a destiny he didn't choose. But now, standing beside Seraphis, he realized that they were not bound by chains anymore. They were bound by something far stronger, the choices they made, the love they shared, and the infinite possibilities that lay ahead. He reached out, taking her hand in his, and felt the warmth of her touch, the pulse of their bond that had become a part of both of them. It wasn't just the curse that had tied them together, it was their shared journey, their sacrifices, and the love that had blossomed amidst the darkness. Together then, Jack said, his voice firm with conviction, we face the unknown. No more curses. No more chains. Seraphis's smile deepened, and she squeezed his hand. Together, she echoed, her voice filled with a promise that no force in the universe could break. As they turned and walked through the ruins, now free of the curse that had once bound them, they felt the weight of the past fall away, replaced by the exhilarating unknown that awaited them. The stars stretched out before them, endless and full of potential, and Jax felt a sense of freedom he had never known. He no longer had to fight to survive. He was free to live, to explore, to choose. The ruins behind them were silent, their secrets now laid bare, and the darkness that had once clung to Seraphis faded with every step. They moved forward, into the light, into the vastness of space, where no curse could follow and no chain could bind them. Together, they were free. As they stepped beyond the threshold of the ruined world, the stars above them shone brighter than ever before, as if the universe itself was watching, waiting to see where their journey would lead. And so they moved into the unknown, hand in hand, bound by something far stronger than a curse, a love forged in darkness, tested by sacrifice, and destined to last for eternity. The end.